The Meaning of Life, an Anatomy of the Observer. Prologue, The Panic at 3 a.m. If you're watching this, you likely know the feeling. It usually arrives at night, often between the hours of 3 and 4 a.m., when the defenses of the waking mind are down. It is a sudden, gasping realization that jolts you awake. It is not a fear of pain or injury or failure. It is a terrifying vertical drop into the realization that you, the specific I currently watching this video, are a temporary arrangement of matter that will eventually be dismantled. This video is not here to tell you that you are wrong to feel this. We are often told that the fear of death is irrational or cowardly or a sign of spiritual immaturity. This is false. The fear of non-existence is the most rational, logical, and biologically accurate reaction a conscious organism can have. It is not a malfunction. It is a feature. It is your hardware working exactly as designed. However, just because the machine is working doesn't mean we have to be slaves to its error messages. This video is a manual for the operator. It is an attempt to map the anatomy of that dread, to understand the mechanics of the null, and to find a way to live in the house without being terrified of the eviction notice. You are functioning correctly, but there is a better way to run the software. Part 1, the error in the nothing. There is a logical symmetry to our existence that offers absolutely no emotional comfort. We are told by philosophers and physicists alike that the state of being dead is identical to the state of not yet being born. They tell us to look backward at the billions of years of cosmic history, the formation of the stars, the cooling of the earth, the rise and fall of empires, and notice that we were absent for all of it. We did not suffer. We did not feel excluded. We simply were not. Therefore, the argument goes, we should not fear the billions of years that will follow our exit. The abyss behind us is the same as the abyss ahead of us. But the human machine rejects this symmetry. To the conscious mind, those two voids are opposites. The void before birth is a waiting room we have successfully left. The void after death is an eviction notice we are forced to sign. The terror isn't that the party continues without us. The terror is that for the attendee, the party ceases to exist the moment they step out the door. We often describe death as a fade to black, but even that is a comforting lie. Black is a color. Darkness is a sensory input. It is what happens when the optic nerve reports an absence of photons. Darkness is something you experience. The reality we fear is not darkness. It is null. It is the absence of the receiver itself. Consider the solitary experience of the observer. Each of us lives inside a skull-sized cinema watching a private screening of the universe. We are the projectionist, the audience, and the critic. We know intellectually there are 8 billion other cinemas playing similar movies next door. But we can never enter them. We can only watch on our own screen. When we grapple with the end of our lives, we aren't mourning the plot twists we'll miss in the 22nd century. We are paralyzed by the realization that when our projector bulb burns out, the entire theater, the screen, the seats, the walls, the concept of light itself vanishes. Relative to the observer, the destruction of the self is indistinguishable from the destruction of the universe. Part 2. The Revolt of the Machine. We are capable of immense intellectual bravery while the sun is up. We can sit in comfortable chairs holding books written by men dead for 2,000 years and agree with their logic. We can nod at the Epicurean idea that death is nothing to us. We can rationalize that we are merely biological vessels, renting atoms from the universe that must eventually be returned. The math checks out, the logic is sound. But the body does not read philosophy. Deep within the brainstem, far below the neocortex where we construct our clever arguments, there is an ancient, hard-coded directive. Stay on. It is the operating system's root command. It governs every breath, every heartbeat, and every flinch away from a hot stove. It is a system designed entirely for continuity. The terror of death, that sudden grasping panic that strikes at 3 a.m., is not a philosophical disagreement. It is a biological revolt. It is the hardware reacting to a software command it cannot process. When we try to truly visualize our own non-existence, we are asking a machine built for survival to simulate its own destruction. It is a cognitive division by zero. The brain spins, heats up, and throws an error message that we perceive as primal dread. This isn't sadness. It is the feeling of a system detecting a fatal voltage drop. This is why the ostrich method, burying our heads in the sand, is not an act of cowardice, but a biological necessity. To function, we must ignore the inevitable. We have to trick the machine. We have to pretend that the unplugging is a theoretical concept rather than a scheduled event. Because when we drop the pretense, when we look directly at the event horizon, we aren't met with the calm acceptance of a satisfied dinner guest leaving the banquet. We are met with the desperate clawing resistance of an organism that knows only one thing. I am here, and I must remain. Part 3. The numbing versus the tuning. If the biological revolt is the scream, civilization is the mute button. But not all silence is created equal. We have constructed a world of elaborate, glittering noise, designed not just to entertain us, but to insulate us. We often wonder why humans are so obsessed with productivity, with accumulation, with the ceaseless consumption of media. We assume it is greed or boredom, but look closer, and you see the frantic energy of a person trying to keep a fire from going out. We fill every waking second with input. We scroll through infinite feeds of information that we will forget 10 seconds later. We obsess over the intricate details of a favorite sports team, or the repetitive motion of knitting a scarf, or the exhausting physical demand of a marathon. We assume we are bored, but we are actually trying to keep a fire from going out. This is the input of numbing. It is anesthesia. It puts the observer to sleep so the dread cannot be heard. But there is a different kind of engagement. Output. Consider the musician lost in the rhythm, the carpenter sanding a joint, or the athlete locked into a strategy. They are also ignoring the dread, but they are not numbing themselves. They are tuning. They are entering a state of flow. In flow, the self-talk stops. The constant nagging reminder of our own temporality vanishes. But unlike the passive anesthesia of consumption, this active engagement validates the observer. We must be careful not to confuse the two. Numbing is an attempt to hide from death by pretending we aren't here. Tuning is an attempt to transcend death by being fully here. One is a distraction, the other is a function. The goal is not to stop doing. The goal is to stop doing things that put us to sleep and start doing things that wake us up. Part 4. The Museum of Ash. While we use distraction to look away from the end, we spend the rest of our time furiously working to make the middle permanent. We operate under the delusion that we are building a structure that will last, when in reality, we are simply hoarding data in a machine scheduled for demolition. This is the accumulation trap. From the moment we gain consciousness, we begin to collect. We collect skills, how to crochet a blanket, how to navigate a kayak through rapids, how to solve complex differential equations. We collect memories, the smell of a grandparent's house, the specific quality of light on a Tuesday in October, the intricate private language shared between spouses. We curate a self as if it were a library. We spend decades refining the catalog, polishing the shelves, and adding volumes of wisdom and experience. The tragedy of the observer is not just that the screen goes black. It is the total, instantaneous deletion of the library. This is why the transition to non-existence feels like a robbery. If we were born with nothing and died with nothing, the equation would be balanced. But we die with everything. The more we live, the more we love, and the more we learn, the more we have to lose. A life well lived is, paradoxically, a more tragic loss than a squandered one. because the pile of assets being incinerated is larger. The dread we feel is the frantic anxiety of an artist watching their life's work suspended over a shredder. To combat this fear of deletion, we invent the illusion of legacy. We tell ourselves that if we cannot survive, our impact will. We find comfort in the idea of leaving the world a better place. We plant trees that we will never sit under. We build companies, paint portraits, or raise children, believing that these remnants act as a tether to existence. We convince ourselves that being remembered is a diet version of being alive. But this too is a logic error of the living. Legacy is for the survivors, not the departed. A statue in a park may bring joy to the birds and the tourists, but it brings zero sensation to the person it commemorates. The observer who has transitioned to null cannot feel the warmth of being remembered. They cannot check the scoreboard to see if their charity work reduced suffering in 2080. The uncomfortable truth is that legacy is a vanity project for the ego, a way to pretend that the self has echoes that reverberate after the signal is cut. But to the amplifier that has been unplugged, the echo is irrelevant. Whether the world continues in utopia or burns in apocalypse, the observer is no longer there to validate it. The Museum of Ash may stand for 1,000 years, but the curator has left the building, and they are never coming back to check the guestbook. Part 5. The Squatter's Panic. At the core of the observer's panic is a fundamental misunderstanding of our legal standing in the universe. We feel that death is a violation, a theft of property. When we contemplate the end, we feel the righteous indignation of a homeowner being forced out of a house they built with their own hands. We look at our consciousness, our memories, and our self, and we say, "This is mine, you have no right to take it." This is the tenant's delusion. We move through life with the swagger of landlords. We treat our bodies and minds as freehold assets. We renovate them with education, we decorate them with experiences, we fortify them with nutrition and exercise. We assume that because we occupy the space, we hold the deed. But a cold look at the physics reveals a different contract. We are not owners. We are squatters. Every carbon atom in our lungs, every electrical impulse on our nerves, and every calorie of energy powering the observer was loaned to us by a universe that operates on a strict cycle of recycling. We were thrown into this existence without an application fee. We were given the keys to a miracle, the ability to perceive, to feel, to taste, to think, completely pro bono. The pain of the transition to null is largely the pain of repossession. Because we have lived in the house for 40, 60, or 80 years, we have forgotten the terms of the lease. We have forgotten that the self is a temporary arrangement of matter, not a permanent fixture of reality. We view the retrieval of these atoms as a robbery rather than a return. The dread we feel is the shock of the freeloader who has convinced themselves that they are the master of the estate. We stand at the door shouting at this sheriff of entropy, waving a title deed that never existed. We claim we have unfinished business, that we need more time to complete our renovations, ignoring the fact that the lease was always day-to-day, terminable at will, without notice. If we truly owned our consciousness, death would indeed be a crime. But since we are merely squatting in a vessel on loan from the cosmos, death is simply the expiration of a generous, if terrifyingly brief, tenancy agreement. The observer's error in falling in love with the view from a window that was never theirs to keep. Part 6. The Apocalypse of One. There is a deeper, stranger anxiety that lurks beneath the delusion of ownership. It is the suspicion that we are not merely squatting in the house, and that we are, in some fundamental, terrifying way, holding up the walls. This is the apocalypse of one. We navigate our lives assuming an objective reality. We believe the universe is a hard physical stage that was here before us and will remain after us. We assume that time ticks independently of our watches and that color exists independently of our eyes. But modern physics and biocentrism whisper a different story. They suggest that reality is not a hard object, but a collaborative interaction. A photon has no color until it strikes a retina and is processed by a cortex. Air pressure has no sound until it vibrates a tympanic membrane. Time has no flow until a consciousness strings moments together. If this is true, then the observer is not just a passive witness to the universe. The observer is the renderer of the universe. We are each running a high-fidelity simulation of existence inside our skulls. We are the projectors. The world we see, the faces of our loved ones, the sun rising over the horizon, the history books on the shelf, is a broadcast generated by the unique interaction between the cosmos and our specific consciousness. This validates the deepest, most unspeakable horror of the transition to null. The suspicion that when our projector stops, our movie doesn't just continue without an audience, it ceases to exist entirely. Think of the dreamer. When a person dreams, they create a world full of people, landscapes, histories, and dramas. While in the dream, it feels solid. It feels independent. But when the dreamer wakes or dies, that world doesn't go on without them. It instantly evaporates. The cities inside the dream don't keep functioning. They vanish because the substrate sustaining them has been removed. From the strict first-person perspective of the observer, death is not a departure from the world. It is the deletion of the world. The fade to black is not just the end of the viewer. It is the implosion of the view. It is the moment when the space-time coordinates that held reality together lose their coherence. So the dread is justified. We are not merely mourning our own absence from the future. We are mourning the total annihilation of the only universe we have ever known, the one that exists exclusively within us. We are lonely gods, terrified that our death is the heat death of everything we love. Part 7. The Lottery of Dust. If the terror of death is the realization that we will return to zero, we must confront the staggering improbability that we ever reached 1 in the first place. We spend our lives plagued by the fear of losing consciousness, forgetting that for the vast majority of cosmic history, the odds of us gaining it were effectively null. We are not just survivors, we are statistical anomalies of the highest order. Consider the biology of the starting line. In the lifespan of a single human male, the testicles will produce roughly 525 billion sperm cells. A human female is born with approximately 1 to 2 million oocytes, eggs, of which only about 300 to 400 will ever be released for potential fertilization. Every single successful conception is the result of a specific, violent, microscopic race. One specific swimmer, carrying a unique half of a genetic code, had to outpace millions of competitors. It had to navigate a hostile chemical environment, survive the journey, and breach the wall of one specific egg at one specific millisecond. If that swimmer had been 1 second slower, if the parents had met 1 hour later, if a great-great-grandfather had stepped off a curb a moment too soon, the observer, known as you, does not exist. Instead, a brother or sister, a completely different consciousness with different eyes and a different laugh, takes the slot. We are surrounded by a silent, invisible population, the unborn. These are the trillions of potential humans who were chemically possible but historically unrealized. They are the ghosts in our DNA. They are the alternate versions of us that never won the lottery. This forces us to ask the most difficult question of all. Are we the lucky ones? There is a philosophical argument known as antinatalism, which suggests we are not. It argues that coming into existence is actually a harm. The logic is brutal. The unborn do not suffer. They do not feel pain. They do not experience the heartbreak of loss. And, crucially, they never have to face the terror of the null. They remain safely in the peace of non existence. By winning the race, we have won the capacity to suffer. We have been ripped from the peaceful void and thrust into a world of entropy, anxiety, and eventual decay. We were given a ticket to a show that we know will end in a fire. And yet, ask any observer in the quiet moments between the fear if they would trade places with the sperm that died in the canal. Ask the terrified mind at 3 a.m. if it would prefer to have never been born at all. The answer is almost always a desperate no. Why? Because even a doomed consciousness is infinitely more valuable than a potential one. The unborn are safe, yes, but they are zero. We, the living, are the only part of the universe that gets to taste itself. We are the only atoms that have woken up. The price of this ticket is the terror of the exit. The cost of being the one who made it is the knowledge that you will eventually have to give it back. But when we look at the alternative, the silent, endless, unfeeling dark of the never was, the terror of death is revealed to be a luxury tax. It is the price we pay for the miraculous, improbable, and terrifying privilege of having existed at all. Part 8. The semicolon and the drop. To declare that existence is always a miracle is to insult those for whom it feels like a prison. But there is a specific, haunting data set that comes from those who tried to leave early and failed. The Semicolon Club. Survivors of the Golden Gate Bridge often report a violent clarity the moment their hands left the railing. One survivor famously noted that he instantly realized everything in his life was fixable, except for the fact that he had just jumped. This is the most violent confirmation of the biological revolt we have. When the self, the depression, the logic, the pain, makes the decision to die, it is often overruled by the organism the moment gravity takes hold. In midair, the philosophy evaporates. The cognitive error clears. The observer suddenly realizes that the burning theater was still better than the dark alley outside. This realization creates a profound shift in the valuation of the lease. Members of the Semicolon Club, those who survive their own attempts to unplug, often return to life with a chaotic, vibrant appreciation that the rest of us lack. They have touched the knoll. They have seen the screen flicker to gray, and in that flicker, they realize the static of existence, the bills, the heartbreaks, the boredom, is actually a frequency. It is something. Compare this to the survivors of accidents, the car wreck victims, the plane crash survivors, the people who wake up in ICU after a heart stops. These observers didn't choose to leave. They were almost evicted by force. Their experience of the bonus round is slightly different, but equally illuminating. They don't experience the regret of the jumper. They experience the shock of the squatter who almost got caught. They realize with violent clarity how tenuous the tendency really is. For both the intentional survivor and the accidental survivor, the problems of life undergo a radical alchemy. Traffic jams, rainy days, and awkward conversations are no longer annoyances. They are texture. They are sensory inputs that confirm the system is still online. The paradox of the observer is this: we often have to crash the machine to realize how much we love the hum of the engine. It seems we are incapable of truly valuing the light until we have felt the temperature drop of the encroaching dark. The semicolon is not just a mark of survival. It is a mark of a person who has peeked behind the curtain, saw the nothingness, and decided that the show, no matter how tragic the plot, is worth watching until the very last frame. Part 9. The Renter's Absolution. We accept that we are anomalies and squatters. The only logical response is not despair. It is a radical, reckless freedom. We must evolve from the panic of the squatter to the strategy of the renter. The terror of death is the terror of the owner losing their asset. But once we truly internalize that we are renters, the terror dissolves into something else: absolution. Think of the difference between owning a car and renting one. When you own a car, you worry about every scratch. You stress about the mileage. You keep the resale value in your mind. You are burdened by the assets. But when you rent a car, you do not worry about the resale value. You do not worry if the tires are wearing down. You worry about only one thing: where can this machine take me right now? This is the renter's joy. When we accept that the self is a short term rental with a non negotiable return date, we are absolved of the need to preserve it. We are free to use it up. We are free to run the engine hot. The goal of life is not to return the body to the earth in mint condition. It is to skid sideways into the grave, thoroughly used up, worn out, and loudly proclaiming, "Wow, what a ride." The inevitability of the null is not a curse. It is a permission slip. Because the game has a hard stop, there are no permanent consequences to our embarrassment. There is no internal record of our failures. If the universe ends when we die, then our mistakes die with us. The awkward conversation, the failed business, the heartbreak, these are not permanent scars on the face of history. They are fleeting plot points in a movie that will soon be deleted. This realization grants us the Walter White agency. It allows us to strip away the ostrich maneuvers and the distraction engines. We don't need to hide from the end anymore, because the end is what gives us the freedom to be dangerous, to be honest, and to be present. We are standing on the bridge, but we don't need to jump to see the view. We can simply acknowledge the drop. We can look at the abyss, respect it, and then turn back to the party with the manic appreciation of a guest who knows the bar is closing in 10 minutes. The drink tastes better when it's the last one. The music sounds sweeter when the lights are about to come on. By embracing the renter's mindset, we stop trying to keep life and start trying to spend it. We stop hoarding the minutes and start burning them, knowing that the only tragedy is to return the keys, having never taken the car out of the garage. But be warned, while the house is not yours to keep, you still have to sleep in it tonight. And if you trash the room in a fit of nihilism, you are the one who has to wake up in the wreckage. Part 10: The Acoustics of the Soul. This brings us to the trap door. Upon realizing the lease is temporary, the immature mind might conclude, well, then nothing matters. I can smash the windows. This is the hedonist's error. It is a failure to understand the acoustics of the room. The observer is not hermetically sealed. We are permeable. We are social animals hardwired with mirror neurons. When we cause suffering, we ingest a microdose of that suffering. Think of your consciousness as a sound booth. Every action you take is a sound wave generated within that booth. If you fill the room with dissonance, you are the one who has to sit in the noise. Acting with vitriol is self-sabotage. Conversely, altruism is the ultimate renter's hack. By curating a peaceful, cooperative environment, we are upgrading the amenities of our rental unit. We are making the movie better for the viewer. To live in the now implies that the future you, even if they only exist for another hour, will have to live in the house the present you is building. We are all stuck in the same elevator. We might as well hold the door. Part 11: The Archipelago of Self. The greatest trick the ego ever played was convincing us that we are islands. This reinforces the dread that if the island sinks, this civilization is lost. But we are not islands. We are an archipelago. We look separate on the surface, but underneath the water, we are all part of this same submerged continent. Science suggests that the self is not a fortress, it is a node in a network. We are constantly uploading and downloading consciousness to and from one another. The you that you are so afraid of losing is actually a collage of them. If we accept this, the terror of the null shifts. The unplugging is not the end of the signal. It is simply the closure of one specific port. The data you processed and the love you transmitted has already been copied onto the hard drives of everyone you touched. Part 12. The probability of now. The final realization for the renter is that time is a lie. The past is dead data. The future is a simulation. The only thing that exists is the now. The source of our dread is that we refuse to live in the house we are renting. We are standing on the porch, peering into the fog of the future eviction. The antidote is high fidelity observation. When we practice true presence, we increase the frame rate of our existence. By recording more data in the same amount of time, we stretch the subjective experience of that second. In the state of hyper-observation, the dread of the null vanishes because the null is a future tense concept. In the exact millisecond of this breath, the renter is secure. We cheat the timeline not by extending the duration of the lease, but by expanding the depth of it. Part 13. The Science of the Fade. If we look at music, we find the blueprint for the end. Music relies on the relationship between tension and resolution. An endless life would be a song that refuses to resolve. A sus4 chord held for eternity. It would be torture. It is the resolution, the return to the silence, that gives the melody its shape. We too are vibrating systems. A life well lived is a composition that moves through dissonance and joy, but it must resolve. The null is not an error. It is the final chord that makes the song make sense. We prepare for our resolution by widening the mix. When we give joy to others, we create a soundstage that is rich and shared. If we live selfishly, the final fade feels like a power outage. But if we have widened the soundstage, the end feels like a professional, deliberate fade out. Part 14. The Silent Forest. The skeptic asks, who cares? If the fade out leads to null, why does the quality of the resolution matter? We return to the riddle. If a tree falls in the forest, you are the ear. You are the mechanism by which the universe confirms its own existence. This is the duty of the witness. We must distinguish between ego legacy, vanity, and eco legacy, stewardship. Ego legacy is scratching your name on the wall. It is useless. Eco legacy is leaving the room clean for the next renter. Does the resolution matter if we won't be there to remember it? Yes, because for the duration of the broadcast, you are the universe. If you fall in panic and vitriol, the universe is a scream. If you fall in acceptance, the universe is a symphony. We resolve the chord not for the applause, but because in the brief flash where we exist, it is our job to make the music sound good. Art 15. The perfect fade. We begin in terror. We stared into the null and saw a robbery, but now we see the exit door for what it is, the end of the shift. There is a profound dignity in the role of the witness. For a brief spark of time, you were the eyes of the cosmos. You performed your function. You recorded the data. Now we evolve from renters to guests. The guest knows they do not own the house. They know the party has an end time. And because of that, they are gracious. They do not hoard the keys. When the moment comes, we do not need to scream against the dying of the light. We can look at the world one last time, not with the greedy eyes of an owner, but with the grateful eyes of a guest who was allowed to stay longer than the math should have allowed. We made a sound in the forest. It was a complex sound full of dissonance and harmony. And because we were there to hear it, it was real. Now we can let the fader drop, not because the signal failed, but because the song is finished. And it was a masterpiece.